there were a lot of things that went wrong for the Dallas Cowboys in 2024. Namely, the fact that they, again, did not end the season with Dak Prescott starting at quarterback. Now, 2023, 2022, and 2021, that 3-year stretch for the Dallas Cowboys, it's one of the most winningest 3-year stretches in Cowboys history. You really have to go back to the late 70s, early 80s to see a winning stretch of 3 or more years that is that good. And the common factor in all 3 of those seasons is that Dak Prescott played all of the season or very close to all of the season. 2022, Prescott played in 12 games, but in 2023, he played 17. In 2021, he played 16 and sat the last game I think they had their seating locked up and they didn't really need to think about playing Prescott. But 2024, Dak only plays 8 games. Even in those 8 games, it looks tough for him. The running game for Dallas, both on the offense and defense, they were 30th in yards per attempt. They couldn't block very well for either Prescott or for Cooper Rush. Prescott got sacked about 3 times a game. Cooper Rush didn't get sacked as much, but still 13 sacks. This was a team that just week after week seemed to just shoot themselves in the foot, or they would lose games where they probably should have won them, even with Cooper Rush in as the quarterback. And they still made somewhat of a good season out of 2024. They end 7-10. They, up until week 16, had a sliver of a chance to make the playoffs. You know, they go on a decent 5-week stretch where they win 4 of 5 against decent teams. I mean, you beat Washington in Washington. You beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But then you lose big to Philly. And that's kind of a common theme in 2024 for Dallas. The 2 Philly games, you lose a combined score of 13-75. And then you end the year with a 19-23 loss to Washington. So we know all of the things that Dallas did poorly last year. They had some health issues. They could not run the ball. They could not defend the run. They really couldn't pass the ball either. But I think when you're kind of tasked with an offense that can't run the ball, and nothing against Rico Dowdle, and nothing against the running backs that they had on this team last year, they were pretty much doomed from the start. I mean, they brought Ezekiel Elliott back to be the number 2 running back. Everybody knew that was going to be an issue before the season started. The best thing that you got out of both of these guys, and mostly just Rico Dowdle, because Ezekiel Elliott, about halfway through the year, I think Dallas kind of figured out they couldn't rely on him anymore. And they just went to Dowdle. He became a decent passing option, and especially as Cooper Rush had to come in, he became a good check down option. We didn't really get a crazy year from CeeDee Lamb. He was a Pro Bowler. He was a second-team All-Pro. But it's kind of, again, to be expected when you're playing half of the season with a backup quarterback. You miss a couple games as well. You're not going to have that outstanding statistical performance. To the defensive side of the ball, Micah Parsons, even with a few games missed, 12 sacks, 23 QB hits. And that's really it on the defense that you want to highlight. You know, Trayvon Diggs, he came back from injury, had a couple of interceptions, but there's not a lot to point to defensively, like just from a statistical standpoint, and be like, this guy was our shining light. This was a guy, even in the defensive year where we were 31st in points allowed, 28th in yards allowed, this is a guy to point to and say, this is why we still are confident going into the next year. It's really just Micah Parsons, in my opinion. And that's why I think, as we'll get into, we see a lot of changes on the defense that they're hoping to make this defense better with. So, going into what they have done in the offseason this year, I'm going to start with the draft because I think each year, that's probably the most important thing to get right is the draft. And while I do think they did a good job in the draft this year, the Dallas Cowboys, they addressed their offensive line issue. They needed another interior presence. They get Tyler Booker to become the third Tyler to start on their offensive line, along with Guyton and Smith. He's going to fill out a pretty good offensive line. Cooper Beebe is probably the weakest link on here, but I think, he's surrounded by some pretty good talent. He's got Terrence Steele with him, Tyler Booker, Tyler Smith, and Tyler Guyton. This is getting back to the Dallas Cowboys that fans of the Cowboys have loved over the last few years, where they've had great offensive line talent. And outside of that in the draft this year, you have Donovan Azareku, you get Siobhan Revel, who I think, honestly, Revel probably was a first-round talent, and due to some injury concerns, fell. I think getting him in the third round is incredible value. Jaden Blue out of Texas as a running back. Even if he is not like a day one contributor with the rest of the running backs that they brought in, and this is basically a completely redone running back room. So it's really going to be between Blue, Miles Sanders, and Javonte Williams, who they also brought in through free agency this year. It's kind of going to be who can really make the most impact. We know Javonte Williams had a decent year off of injury last year in Denver, but it was pretty much a guarantee he wasn't going to be coming back. There was always issues with Javonte, it seemed like, between him and Sean Payton with his playing time. Miles Sanders was a complete shell of himself in Carolina, although he was still a decent pass-catching option. So it's really going to be who can make the most out of the opportunity to possibly start for this team. And honestly, I don't see one clear starter. I just see three guys that hopefully make this one complete, three guys to basically make one complete back. And if you get that, that's more than enough to get good production. But where this team is obviously going to be looking at on offense, it's going to be CeeDee Lamb, it's going to be Jake Ferguson, and it's going to be George Pickens, who they traded for from the Pittsburgh Steelers. They really did not give up a lot to get Pickens, considering the fact that they're hoping that Pickens can be their number 2 receiver that can really just eat off of the fact that teams are going to focus on CeeDee Lamb. I mentioned the fact that CeeDee Lamb, we didn't see an incredible season from him, but again, that's with not really another receiver on the other side of him. That's with a backup quarterback for the entire season, and it's with a running game that was non-existent. So to still get 100-plus receptions out of CeeDee Lamb, to still get 1,000 receiving yards out of CeeDee Lamb, that's really good. And if you have Prescott for the whole year, if you have George Pickens for the whole year, who, you don't have to double George Pickens, but you always have to be aware of the fact that he can win one-on-one catches almost whenever he wants. Now to the defense. So there's a few guys on this side of the ball that it's going to be really interesting to see what this year brings. I would say the biggest, not addition, but re-signing is going to be Osa Odigizua. This is going to be, the year where we see if some of this money that Dallas has given out is actually going to pay off. They not only give money to Osa Odigizua to come back, I believe it was somewhere in the realm of a 3-year deal, about $40 to $50 million. I could be completely wrong about that. In fact, I'm looking it up right now. But while I do that, it's him, and then it's Mozzie Smith as well, who not only had a lot of money given to him, he was a very highly drafted player coming out of college in 2023, and both in 2023 and in 2024, I think it was a pretty big disappointment. That's why I think you saw guys like Dante Fowler get signed, who had an incredible season with Washington last year. Thomas Solomon comes in, who, again, is a first-round pick who's never really been able to match that billing, especially as a top, I think, 5 pick, Solomon Thomas was. He's a good vet to have. But there's other players, Sam Williams, Marshawn Nealon, Peyton Turner. You draft Donovan Izaraku, who isn't signed yet, but you hope brings more production to that pass rush. And then it's always going to be the revolving conversation around Micah Parsons. And we don't know yet whether or not Micah Parsons is going to get a contract extension. We don't really know yet if he's going to hold out. The thought is that he's not going to hold out, but I would never guarantee that in the NFL these days. The linebacker group, I don't know what to expect, right? And your linebacking group, it's going to be DeMarvion Overshown, who there is a lot of hype behind him. He was blossoming into a pretty good player until he got injured. Kenneth Murray, who they traded for from Tennessee, he's never been an incredible linebacker, but he's always a quality player. Jack Sanborn and Maurice Luafau. I just don't love the group, but it's a quality enough group that I think can get the job done. The secondary. Again, another trade to kind of highlight Kaiir Elam getting traded from Buffalo to Dallas. This is a lot of guys who have put up a lot of stats. Trayvon Diggs, Daron Bland, they've put up a lot of stats in the NFL. And they're kind of surrounded by veteran players. Malik Hooker, Donovan Wilson, another vet. Israel Mukuumau, another vet. And Marquise Bell. There's some veteran players in the secondary, but there's also a lot of chances being taken on this secondary. Trayvon Diggs and Daron Bland, just with their play style. There's a chance being taken on Kaiir Elam. As a first-round pick, Elam really disappointed in Buffalo. And now he's going to be a starter in Dallas. So that's going to be interesting to me to see just what it really looks like for Kaiir Elam, if he's going to be a guy that actually steps up and fulfills that first-round pick billing and gives the, gives the Cowboys a good feeling about trading for him. Now, to what this season looks like from a schedule standpoint for the Dallas Cowboys, you've got some pretty big games. You have your obvious 6 division games, 2 against Philly, 2 against Washington, and 2 against the New York Giants. And you're on a lot of teams' radars as a Dallas Cowboy. You are. Teams are going to always love to beat the Dallas Cowboys. So that's why it makes games like the Kansas City Chiefs in late November, the Detroit Lions on Thursday Night Football, Minnesota Vikings, LA Chargers. These are going to be tough games for the Cowboys. But I think, honestly, talent-wise, Dallas is going to be able to stay in some of these games. And they have reinvented their coaching staff. There's a lot of talk about Brian Schottenheimer. There's a lot of talk about Matt Eberflus. And I don't know if their coaching staff is going to be good enough to compare to those of Philly or even Washington or even Denver or I already mentioned Philly, but Kansas City, Detroit. Like, the coaching staff is probably going to be what lets this team down throughout the year. And for that reason, honestly, I see a floor for this team. They could be 5-12 or 6-11. If the Micah Parsons contract situation starts to get ugly, if the coaching staff starts to look like they're maybe in over their head a little bit, if Dak Prescott regresses, if CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens aren't able to be that 1-2 duo that we think they could be, if the running back room is as bad as it was last year, if the offensive line doesn't improve, this could be another bad year for Dallas if things go completely wrong. But that's an obvious statement to make, right? That's, if you just look at every single team and say if everything goes wrong, they could lose a lot of games. I'm not saying anything that's really major, but I'm saying, there's specific things you could point to with the Cowboys where it makes their floor lower than other teams if things go wrong, if that makes sense at all. Their ceiling, though, if things go right, this could be the team that wins the NFC East this year. I think at quarterback, they have a guy that can compare. He's not going to beat out Jalen Hurts or even Jaden Daniels right now in terms of popularity rankings. He's not going to outshine them. He's not going to be considered anything better than either of those two guys right now. But he can compare statistically. And, honestly, you get enough statistics, you're going to score points, you're going to win games. The offensive line, I think, compares. It's probably better than Washington. It compares to Philly. It's markedly worse. Markedly. But that's more of a compliment to Philly than it is a detriment or, a insult to Dallas. The defense, I think, compares. Obviously worse than Philly. But I think better than Washington. I think pass rush wise, if the guys are hitting, if the guys are playing well, they're better than Washington. I think the secondary is kind of where things get tricky. If Trayvon Diggs and Dayron Bland are getting beat, it's going to be a long day for the Dallas Cowboys. And that could be a game-by-game situation, right? It could be games where both of those guys have pick sixes. It could be games where both of these guys go for a pick and it just goes right over them. And we're looking at games where both of those guys let up 40-plus yard touchdowns. So, with that, I set their ceiling, like I said, again, 11-6, 12-5, winning this division. They could do it. They could easily do it. And I honestly see them somewhere in that wild card round because I think Philly, even though they lost some guys, and I think Washington, even though they're probably not going to win the division, those are the two teams to beat right now. And neither of them got markedly worse. Philly lost Milton Williams, but they still have that offensive line. They still have Jalen Hurts, and they still have Saquon Barkley. And I think a team equipped with that and with the receivers that they have and Dallas Goedert, that's a complete team offensively. So Dallas, I would think shooting for a 9-8, 10-7 record and sneaking into the wild card round, that should be what this team shoots for because that's probably the easiest way for them to make the playoffs. And if they really think they can do it, make a Super Bowl run.